Over the last couple of weeks, I've been having a lot of conversations online on my short form content about attachment issues. And I think the reason I have been focusing so heavily on this lately is because, ever since I've understood my framework and moving through my own framework, I just perceive the whole attachment conversation differently. I made a video where I was talking about how avoidant people don't really trigger me anymore, how I don't experience people taking space as avoidant. And um, somebody commented, now this woman, she likes to comment. She doesn't follow me, but she likes to comment and challenge a lot of my videos. And I understand because my videos can be confronting when someone is committed to, a specific narrative. But she commented on my video, oh, so, you're just tolerating their avoidance now. It's not that they're not avoidant, you're just tolerating it. And I think this is where understanding nervous system states has become fundamental in terms of relating to other people, right? Because people's choices of words directly reflect the nervous system state that they're in. So if I perceive that I need to tolerate something, it is reflective that that other person's behavior is impacting me, right? And so, like, it still impacts my nervous system, which in turn demonstrates that I'm still relating to people from my wounding instead of my own self empowerment. So the fact that she word used the word tolerate was like an indicator to the state that she was in. And I get it. And I get it because I've been there. I spent the better part of my 20s and my 30s as anxiously attached. Like I now would have defined myself as anxiously attached. I had this deep, deep fear of abandonment because from my experience, from my early adolescent experience, everybody that I loved left me. Like my dad passed away when I was 16. And to a young, impressionable nervous system, to a brain that wasn't fully developed, it was experienced as abandonment, whether or not it's the same type of abandonment, that we talk about in our anxious relationships. It was experienced as abandonment. Shortly after that, my mom met a man and moved to another country, and my brother moved across Canada to the west coast of Canada to be with a girlfriend. So basically, everyone in my family circle abandoned me in some form or another. That's how it was experienced. So, because of that experience, I developed a belief that everybody I love leaves me. And so, when I moved into, my dating experiences, every single behavior from every single person I interacted with was being perceived through the lens of everybody leaves me. And so, whenever I experienced distance from somebody, for example, immediately I was like, this is dangerous. This is dangerous. They're about to go, right? Every single moment of space meant rejection. Every moment of inconsistency meant that the relationship was unstable. Like, I absolutely could not tolerate uncertainty at all. It was the biggest emotional threat. So I deeply, deeply identify with anxious attachment discourse because that was my experience. So when I was having these experiences in these relationships, every single relationship became organized around securing that connection or preserving closeness or trying to prevent abandonment and trying to manage outcomes, which at the time I didn't recognize that by moving in that direction, by trying to move towards and secure those things, I was actually creating the very thing that I feared. I was creating an experience where other people were going to experience me as too much and clingy and all of the things. But what I can recognize now that I'm on, this side that my attachment wounds don't, run my life anymore, I wasn't actually relating to the person I was dating. I was relating to whatever interpretation I had about their behavior. So I was relating to what their behavior meant about my own safety. So when I recognize this, and I think this is why recognition work is so much different than, for example, inner child work or mindset work. Because once I recognized the structure running the pattern of my anxious attachment, it's a nervous system pattern where I was trying to secure safety outside the self. So once I recognized the structure running the structure actually dissolved. Like the triggers around all of my anxious attachment actually dissolved. So let's get into it. I'm going to reframe anxious attachment through my current lens, like through my framework. The way that I currently perceive anxious attachment is that it is a nervous system safety seeking pattern where one is in a chronic state of other referencing. I speak a lot in my framework about self referencing versus other referencing. So, other referencing is where I am constantly focused on the other person and what they're doing, kind of like a way to micromanage them and their behavior and their commitment level and their love and all of the things, because my nervous system is trying to secure love, safety, connection, approval, validation outside of the self. So the nervous system becomes organized around them and their emotional state. It's constantly scanning to identify if the connection is secure, right? Whether, when there's a little bit of space or a little shift, whether that closeness is being maintained or whether, and more specifically, whether abandonment is going to happen, right? Because if I have a fear of abandonment, I'm constantly going to be looking around to see if I'm going to be abandoned. And this is the reason why, when you're anxiously attached, everything is tracked and traced because the other person has now become the regulator of your internal safety. Safety exists in their behavior and whether or not they're showing up in a way that continues to make me feel safe. And this is why the texting patterns matter so much. This is why shifts in tone matter so much, or why space feels intolerable, or why ambiguity or uncertainty feels so unbearable. When your sense of safety is organized around connection, then distance doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels threatening. It feels like a bear is coming to attack me. So, what's so interesting is that when I was in the thick of my anxious attachment patterns, I always thought the issue was the other person, right? They're the one that are avoiding tough conversations. They're the one that are avoiding my feelings. They're the one that, don't consider my needs. And, it was always they. And this is other referencing. Other referencing is such a dead giveaway that your nervous system is organized around somebody else. So I always thought when I was in it that the issue was avoidant people. And you see this online all the time in like the early stages of people moving through this. Avoidant people are the problem. Avoidant people need to change. They're not showing up. There's no mutuality. There's not, right? There's no reciprocity. They make me feel like my feelings are too much and all the things. It's always about them. But what I can recognize now that I understand orientation and the way our nervous system moves to secure safety, was that I was organizing my identity and my nervous system around maintaining proximity. That proximity was what I perceived as safety. If they're always here, if I can, just reach out and just touch them and they're there and they never wander, then, safety, connection, love is all maintained. So, with all of that in mind, when I go back to what I said in the beginning, the word tolerate, when that commenter said, oh, so you tolerate their avoidance, I can recognize that they were still viewing space through the lens of space equals emotional pain. Because in order to perceive that I am tolerating something, the experience has to be uncomfortable. I am suppressing my own needs. I am like essentially trying to survive an experience of emotional pain. I perceive that I am being asked to accept behavior that harms me, that I am trying to stay regulated on the outside when inside there's like internal distress. Based on the current state that I am in, this is not my experience anymore, right? Like I do not experience another person's space as abandonment. So therefore, it is not something that I quote unquote tolerate. It is something that just is, right? Like if space feels emotionally threatening, then allowing that space to exist is going to feel like self-abandonment. From my experience, when I stopped organizing around the fear of abandonment, when I stopped trying to prevent abandonment or control the situation so that I wouldn't be abandoned, when abandonment stopped being my reference point, I stopped equating space to danger. So, this is why I don't experience it as like I'm tolerating, I'm white knuckling the space, right? I'm not suppressing panic because panic doesn't exist. I'm not pretending to be more evolved than I am. Like there is no internal discomfort when somebody chooses to take space. Like I genuinely do not collapse because somebody needs to take space. So when I think about what actually changed inside of me in order to have this new experience of the same situation, it all comes back to what I teach inside of my framework, which is a combination of self referencing and recognition. So the moment my nervous system is entering a familiar pattern, remembering that anxious attachment is a pattern. It's a safety seeking nervous system pattern where my nervous system is organized around somebody else and what they do instead of the self and what is true for me. So when my nervous system is organized that way, I am constantly trying to chase reassurance. I'm trying to manage outcomes. I need certainty. I need certainty in order to feel stable. I'm constantly monitoring my relationships for connection and reciprocity and mutuality and all of those things. But it's an automatic nervous system pattern, which means the moment I perceive a threat, my nervous system automatically kicks in and I replay the pattern again. Once I was able to see the pattern in real time as it was activated, and again, this is recognition, witnessing the pattern as it unfolds. So I get triggered and I immediately recognize, oh, this is one of my safety seeking patterns. I do not need to follow it. I do not need to double check the text. I do not need to send another one. I do not need to, whatever. It is simply a nervous system pattern. So once I can recognize the pattern as it is happening, I can interrupt it and I can return back to myself. So you know, instead of spiraling down, what does this mean about us? Or what does this mean about the connection? Or this is unsafe, or I'm being abandoned again, or, whatever the spiral ends up being. I started asking myself, what am I actually experiencing right now? Instead of organizing around their reaction, I returned to my own internal experience. And because of that shift, the pattern naturally dissolved. It allowed me to create space for other people to be free to have their own process without it feeling like a threat to me. And because of this, I stopped needing other people to behave a certain way in order for me to feel okay. Like my nervous system learned that it is safe, that I am safe, regardless of what other people do, because I was no longer abandoning the experience. I teach this inside of my framework. Every time I leave the experience I'm having and I move to them and what they're doing, and my nervous system is pulled to something outside of me, every time I do that, I reinforce the pattern, and my nervous system learns that it is not safe to stay in the experience. It is not safe to stay in the feelings of abandonment. I'm trying to do something so that I don't have that feeling. And because of this, because I learned to stay, I stopped needing other people to behave a certain way in order for me to feel okay. And then, ironically, that was the space where I was able to actually see people clearly. Like I was no longer filtering their behavior through fear and meaning making and hypervigilance and my own interpretation and self protection. Now, someone taking space was just that. It was just someone taking space. It was just someone moving through their own process of emotional management, right? It's no longer they're abandoning me. They don't care. I need to fix this. This is actually has nothing to do about me. It has to do about them. It has to do about the way their nervous system moves in order to secure safety, right? Now, whenever I talk about this, there's always some pushback. People are always saying, oh, so this means that you're tolerating mistreatment. It means that you don't have any standards. It means that you should stay in incompatible relationships. And this is not what I'm saying at all. Like, it's not a free for all that everybody gets to do what they want. That's black and white thinking, which is what, like, at the root of all of our, faulty thinking and our distorted thinking. But what happened was I stopped perceiving every single moment of distance as an existential threat, that my life was in danger, because that's how it felt inside of my nervous system. It felt that my life was in fucking danger, that I was being chased by a bear. But I was able to stop perceiving all of these things this way, which means I can now make decisions from clarity instead of fear. I can now tune into my intuition and use discernment instead of perceiving everything through a wounded lens. Like, there is a difference between noticing incompatibility and collapsing because somebody pulled away from you. And in my own experience, when my wounds were organizing my perception, when my wounds were deeply tied to how I was perceiving things, absolutely everything everybody else did felt personal. Everything felt like an attack. Everything. Their behavior was about me, right? Everything was about me, when that's just, quite frankly, not the case. People's behavior is a reflection of them. It's a reflection of their values, of their capacity, of their belief systems. It has nothing to do with you. And that shift is so powerful when it comes to unraveling all of our attachment stuff. It's what allows me to have a lot more empathy, like for somebody who, needs that space or needs that extra time, that's what they're doing for themselves. Beautiful. I think the biggest problem in the healing spaces, in the discourse around attachment and attachment patterns, is that most conversations are about managing your triggers, managing activation. We're taught to, like, soothe the wounds. We're taught to meet our inner child and soothe the wounds. And don't get me wrong, I did all of this too. I have an entire inner child course all about learning self-compassion and how to meet, your wounded parts. We're taught to cognitively reframe the experience, right? To tell ourselves, no, they're not pulling away, they're just tending to themselves, yada yada. And, like, none of these are wrong, but this is the fundamental difference between what I teach and what other people teach. Other people teach you how to manage the wound. So you're constantly going back to reference the wound. Everything is being perceived through the wound. But what I've come to recognize is that by constantly returning to the wound, and soothing the wound and managing the wound and reframing the wound, I'm still relating to every experience through a wound. What if instead I recognized that it was a pattern and I made a choice, that it was a nervous system, safety seeking pattern instead of a wound that I needed to manage? And when I made that shift, that is when my attachment patterns began to dissolve because I was no longer relating to activation as a problem to fix. Thought that healing my anxious attachment was about meeting people and finding people that wouldn't trigger it. But what actually happened was I stopped organizing my identity around the trigger itself. I stopped identifying as somebody who was anxiously attached. And instead, I recognized that it was a safety seeking pattern on autopilot, trying to complete, but I kept getting in the way. And when I gave it space to complete, the whole pattern collapsed. So my relationships didn't change, but my orientation did.